In this video, I'm going to be talking about my experience and showing some examples of using the Sony 200-600 F5.6-6.3 lens on the Sony FX6. Here's the story. Now, first things first, this lens is a big lens physically and also the capabilities that it has going from a 200 to a 600mm focal length. All the example footage that I'm showing today was shot in 4K, 50p, XAVC-I, and a mixture of low base ISO and high base ISO. I shot 50p because I wanted to give flexibility to whoever is editing this footage in post to be able to slow it down or use it at normal speed. Now, when I first started using this lens at the shoot, I thought I'd use the cine saddle because that would give me greater flexibility in moving around the auditorium and get different shots and different angles as quickly as possible without using a tripod. I quickly discovered that shooting at a 600mm focal length is quite hard to get steady shots even when you have a cine saddle. Even with the slightest breath, I'd be moving the cine saddle just a little bit and then moving the camera, and then the shot would have a little bit too much movement and then the composition would suffer because of it. Now, with a little bit of work and a bit more experience, I probably could have got a few more shots that were a bit more stable with the cine saddle, but my first initial impressions are, unless you've got a bit of experience with using a cine saddle and a long focal length like 600mm, then it might be best to just use a tripod. And that's exactly what I did. So I ended up taking my rig and putting it on my Miller DS10 tripod, and I've got plenty of experience using a tripod and camera, moving around auditoriums and spaces to get shots as quickly as possible. So I was quite comfortable doing this. If you don't have a lot of experience using a tripod with your video camera, it might make your process a little bit slower, and unfortunately, if you're running slower, then you might start missing shots. So that is something to consider when using a lens such as this and having to use a tripod just to get those shots to be as stable as possible. Initially, I used the cine saddle because I wanted to have slight movement in the shot, but I ended up finding that the slight movement was a bit too much movement. So that was the main reason I went to the tripod. Because the lens is so big, I was using my small rig lens support, and I was also using 18-inch rails as well, which was going into my small rig base plate as well. Also, with this lens having a maximum focal length of 600mm, this allowed me to get close-up shots of the performers on stage, which I really wouldn't have had access to unless I walked right up the front of the auditorium and shot from there using another lens like a 70-200 or a 24-105 f4 lens. Being able to shoot up the back of the auditorium is quite helpful to be as discreet as possible and not draw too much attention to yourself when trying to get your shots. However, if I did want to start going up the front of the auditorium to get different angles and different types of shots, I would be a little bit of a distraction to the audience members because, as I mentioned earlier in this video, this lens isn't very discreet, and if an audience member sees you using this giant lens, you might draw a little bit of attention to yourself. So that is something to consider when doing event videography with this lens, and if being discreet is a priority for you. All the shots in this video are also being color corrected with Cinematch, which is a paid plugin that you can use on now Final Cut, Premiere Pro, and DaVinci Resolve. And right now, if you are quick, there is currently a 40% discount. This plugin is highly recommended, and although I'm not being sponsored to tell you this, I'm letting you know because this is what I use and I really enjoy using it. After the Carol's performance finished, I then got some B-roll shots of the audience mixing, mingling afterwards, enjoying each other's company. And this is just some extra footage that I can give to my client. So when they're advertising their next Carol's performance, they're able to show people coming to the Carols and also enjoying themselves as well. With the Sony FX6 having really good eye and face autofocus, plus that 600mm reach, this made it really easy to be able to pick off different shots quickly and reliably as well, which ended up giving me more footage to be able to give to my client as opposed to other camera systems that I might have used in the past, and also using lenses that don't have that extra 600mm reach. Being able to stand in one spot away from a lot of the people and just get a whole bunch of different shots really does help in getting authentic shots as well, because people aren't as aware of you getting shots and being concerned about them being filmed. I also got some shots at my church's morning service, and all these shots were shot on a tripod. Once again, the space was quite large, and having that 600mm reach was really helpful when standing right up the back of the space. I found this lens to be quite versatile in these spaces because going from a 200mm to a 600mm, it gave me a lot of room to play with, and I didn't have to be as close to the front of the stage to get nice close-up shots, which is what I was desiring. Even when shooting at an f6.3 using the Sony FX6, because of the low and high base native ISO that you can switch between, I didn't have too much problems with having enough light to be able to capture my images. Even when shooting at 4K 50p using a 180-degree shutter angle, I found I had enough light to get nice usable images. Now, a few things to note about the lens. The weight of the lens is 4.65 pounds or 2,115 grams, and I would suggest using a tripod for best results. It has a maximum aperture of f5.6 when zoomed out to 200mm, and when zoomed in at 600mm, you're limited to f6.3. It has a 95mm filter size thread, so unfortunately I didn't have any Pro Mist filters to put on it. And the minimum focus distance is 7.87 feet or 2.4 meters. And one thing that I did like about this lens is it had an internal zoom. So when you change your focal length, the lens doesn't extrude out. So it's all internal and the actual length of the lens never changes when you change the focal length. Another helpful thing to note is that if you do event coverage outside and you're using the Sony FX6's auto variable ND, then when you're going between the 200mm f5.6 aperture and the 600mm f6.3, the auto ND will smoothly change the exposure, so you don't have to worry about changing ISO or shutter or aperture or whatever when you're filming outside. This is really handy to help you get those shots a lot quicker and not miss any of those important moments. Overall, using this lens for the first time, I was really happy with how it performed, and it really did allow me to get the types of shots that I was desiring. One thing to note about the user experience with this lens is that the zoom and the focus rings on this lens are switched from what I am normally used to. So the end focus ring controls the zoom and the closer ring controls the focus. And I'm used to it being the other way around. So there were a couple of times where I found myself adjusting the focus when I should be adjusting the zoom and adjusting the zoom when I should be adjusting the focus. So that's just something to be aware of. It's just a little bit of a muscle memory thing, and it's not a deal breaker, but just something to be aware of. So would I purchase this lens? Well, even though it gives me a lot of versatility and gets me the close-up shots that I really like to get when standing up the back of an auditorium, due to the size of this lens, it's more of a specialty lens to me. And it's by no means a lens that you can just throw into your camera bag and have it at every single shoot like I can with my Sony 70-200mm f4 lens. If I was to use this lens again in the future, I'd probably just hire it out unless I find myself doing a lot more shoots like this and needing this specific type of setup to get those close-up shots from far away. And that's the video. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel for more videos on video production in the future.